Hello, everyone. My name is Isabel Janikis. I'm a co-founder of the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group together with Rob. And I'm here actually with Bill deBuys in person. So, special treat. We've never done this before. Usually we're all in our little Zoom squares, but today is different. So Bill deBuys is the author of 10 books, and we're going to talk about some of them, or actually all of them, if you like. He has written The River of Traps with photographer Alex Harris, which was a Pulitzer Prize nonfiction finalist in 1991. And he also wrote Enchantment and Exploitation, which won the 1986 Southwest Book Award. His most recent book, The Trail to Kanjiroba, Rediscovering Earth in an Age of Loss, appeared in August 2021. He has been a Kluge Distinguished Visiting Scholar at the Library of Congress in 2018, a Guggenheim Fellow, a Lyndhurst Fellow. He served as founding chair of the Valles Caldera Trust, and that trust administered the Valles Caldera National Preserve from 2001 to 2004. And he lives on this farm that he has tended since 1976 in New Mexico's Sangre de Cristo Mountains. So really, Bill, thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Isabella, and thank you, Rob, for thank you both for pulling this together, and I'm looking forward to a fun conversation.
Yeah, super special.
Good.
So I'd like to start actually with your latest book, The Trail to Kanjiroba, this one, which entails the most direct soil story. So The Trail to Kanjiroba, can you set the stage for us a little bit and tell us what this book is about?
Well, Trail to Kanjiroba is really the third book of a trilogy. The first two volumes are A Great Aridness, which is about climate change. There goes my telephone. We'll just have to ignore it. Maybe I should go turn it off.
Okay. That sounds like a good point. Hang on, you all. Suspense. Good to see you all here.
So the first book of the trilogy was A Great Aridness, which is about climate change. And the second book of the trilogy is called The Last Unicorn, which concerns the loss of Earth's biota, of the defaunation of our forests and wildlands. And it really concerns a wildlife expedition in Laos that I accompanied in the year 2011. Well, after writing about climate change and after writing about species loss, I was sort of bummed out, and I wanted to renew my good feelings about this beautiful planet. And so I joined a medical expedition sponsored by the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, an expedition under the auspices of the Nomads Clinic, which is a creation of Upaya, of Roshi Joan Halifax, the abbot of Upaya. And away we went to one of the most remote regions of Nepal, a district called Dalpo, which is also the domain where a book that many of you will have read, The Snow Leopard, takes place. Snow Leopard, written by the great Peter Matheson. So at any rate, the Trail to Kanjiroba is an account of that expedition, an account of some other journeys in science, including journeys by Charles Darwin and by some of the pioneers who gave us plate tectonic theory. And it's my moral journey as I go from being pretty emotionally sick over my grief for the situation of the environment to really a resurrection of hope. So that's the gist of the book.
Wow. pretty amazing.
Well, I hope people will actually read it and find that it's a worthwhile journey.
Well, I did, and I thought so. So for what it's worth, I actually want to go to that short passage in the book. It's a chapter titled "Cutting Deals," and would you mind reading for us the passage that really is most directly about soil?
Yes, it is about soil. I have to put on the appropriate pair of eyes. So this is Cutting Deals, and the title comes from a comment in the Overstory, a wonderful book, Richard Powers' book. We'll come to that in the passage. Okay, this is kind of late in the journey. We're on our way, completing our circle, only a day or two from getting back to close to our point of origin. In a grove of pines, Jigme, Nurbu, Rigzin, and a few others have stopped to rest. I join them. By this point in the journey, all of us feel the toll of the miles, and we are empty of small talk. A few snacks are passed around. Then we arrange our packs as pillows, lie back in the wiry grass, and stare into the green canopy of the trees. Spangles of sky shine through the branches. A low chirr of insects undergirds the quiet. Far off, a lone bird peeps a single metronomic note. Though the air hardly stirs, the needles of the pines murmur gently. The forest is busy even when it's not busy. Insects hatch, crawl, and forage. Bacteria and fungi, the refineries of the soil, convert organic debris into hundreds of chemicals which trees and other plants take up and move around, root to root, linked by webs of fungal mycelia as intricate as the circuitry of a brain. Organisms large and small twine the forest into a network of interdependence. Birds and worms, beetles and spiders, moths and rodents, the unseen invertebrate, no less than the conspicuous mammal, take and give in uncountable ways, producing a hive of exchange, a continuously negotiated economy of cooperation and competition, out of which every discharge is recycled for new consumption. There seems to be a kind of altruism in this turbulent metabolism. Sometimes trees shunt nutrients to the weakest members of their stand, or they release pheromones to warn of insect attacks so that the downwind forest can muster a chemical defense. It even seems that when death is imminent, some trees will flush nutrients and other valuable compounds through their roots to make a bounty for their neighbors, lest the chemicals decay unused. In Richard Powers' sweeping ecological novel, The Overstory, a character says of the forest she studies, "Everything out here is cutting deals with everything else." The deal-making of the natural world is one of the great post-Darwin discoveries of biological science. For Darwin, evolution proceeded species by species. Such a view reflected his moment in history. He had to start somewhere, and the predominant view of Western culture in his age was that competition among individuals produced the outcomes of life. Human agents of change, such alpha males as statesmen, industrialists, and generals, appeared to be singular and independent, and it was easy to assume that the driving forces of the natural world were similar. Much harder to see were the interconnections among species, which scientists have since teased out through observation and analysis. We now better comprehend that change rarely, if ever, occurs in isolation, and that the true unit of evolution is less the species than the ecosystem, whole communities bound together in relations of reciprocity. To a large degree, it is the ecosystem that collectively accepts, amends, or rejects the changes that arise within it.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so this beautiful description of the soil microbial world leads into a discussion of Darwinian theory, and then touches on the Buddhist concept of interdependence, and culminates in this statement: climate change invites, no, it demands, an ecological view of the world, a view in which life on Earth is a mass of entanglements where everything is connected to everything else. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, climate change is the result of an infinite number of connections, from what happens here on terra firma, which influences the atmosphere and the chemistry of the atmosphere, which influences the chemistry of the oceans, which influences then the formation of storms and storm paths and so forth. I mean, the study of climate is in a way the study of the culmination of how the biosphere moves energy through itself. And unless you appreciate the connectedness within the biosphere, you'll find yourself to be unable to understand the power and the decisiveness of climate change. And I think that part of the denialism that goes on in the world is with people who want to see themselves as unconnected, solitary individual actors, and who sense that if they subscribe to climate change, then they'll have to begin recognizing a lot of other connections in their lives to other people, to other ethnic groups, to other obligations, to a kind of community that they just don't want to connect to. So that's where that passage is going in the book.
Right. Well, I'd like to go to a place earlier in the book where you reveal your motivation for this strenuous trip. And you already mentioned that a little bit in your introduction. You say, I've come to Dorpo partly to think about the ethics of hospice in relation to caring for the planet. The proposition is this: what if we focus less on saving Earth and more on caring for it? What would change in the work of Earth care? And more particularly, what would change for the caregivers? Did you find answers to this question?
I found some of the answers that I thought I was going to find, and then I also found a lot of answers that I didn't think I was going to, that I had no idea about, that I was completely surprised by. But part of what I wanted to do on this expedition was to study how the doctors and nurses and other medicos in our expedition delivered medicine, delivered care and healing in situations where they didn't have access to all the technology that we pretty much take for granted today. The blood work and the x-rays and the MRIs and all the high-tech stuff. We were going into a situation where we would have to practice very old style medicine, which necessarily prioritizes care over cure. And I was wondering if the ethics practiced in the clinic would give me some insight into a set of ethics that might be more effective in Earth care than those I had been practicing. And the answer to that was mostly yes, but the larger answer was that all this abstraction about mottos and guidelines and values and ethics and so forth turned out to be less important in my final I want to say healing. I hope that's not too strong a word. Less important in that than the actual movement, the experience of the expedition. And one of the big takeaways for me was that, notwithstanding that, well, I'm 72 now, I was 69 when we were on the trail, 69 one expedition and 67 another. And the big realization is that at this advanced age, I am still learning how to walk. You know, I didn't get it all done when I was 1 year old and 2. And the metaphor of learning to walk, and the realization, and this is part of the culmination of the book, was the realization, this kind of mantra that came into my head, that the right way to carry the grief about the environment, the right way to carry the grief is the right way of walking. And then to reverse it, the right way of walking is the right way to carry the grief. Anyhow, all that, the resolve of the book is all bundled up in those ideas, not just in all this ethical discussion, which is important, but the more immediate thing, the deeper, more heartfelt thing was actually these discoveries in the act of walking and what the walking meant, both metaphorically and literally.
Oh, thank you. It's really amazing.
Oh, thanks.
And I would gonna say to folks who are listening, you can subscribe on Instagram while you're reading the book. It's really great because there's some amazing pictures that get posted all the time, and it's at deBuys on Instagram, so you can see what the work journey was like. Highly recommended. So let's jump in time to your very first book.
Yeah.
Enchantment and Exploitation, which was published in 1985 and then revised and expanded in 2015. It's as relevant today as it was almost 5 decades ago. And for someone who's not from New Mexico, it has been an invaluable introduction to the complexity and the depths of the relationships with the land that exist here. It's really impossible to cover it all in the short time that we have, but perhaps you could walk us through an example that you give in the book, which is the history of the place where you live, the Las Trampas land grant.
Oh, well, I think a lot of the people with us are New Mexicans, so they know that New Mexico has a turbulent and unhappy history with its land grants being alienated from the rightful heirs of those land grants in the early years of Anglo occupation. And so one chapter in Enchantment and Exploitation provides a history of the Las Trampas land grant. And right now, Isabel and I are sitting in my living room at my dining table, actually, in the heart of the Trampas land grant. And it's not the whole land grant that was alienated or lost, but the commons of the land grant. And the essence of the problem was A, unscrupulous land speculators, and B, their ability to exploit the disjunctures between traditional Spanish and Mexican law, which recognized common ownership of land, and Anglo-Saxon law, as practiced in the United States, which did not recognize common property in the same way. And by exploiting the incompatibility of the two systems, the speculators were able to get hold of a lot of common lands that properly belonged to the people descended from the original settlers in these northern valleys. And interestingly, a lot of these commons wound up in the hands of the U.S. Forest Service as part of the national forests, the Santa Fe and the Carson National Forests in particular. And although the Forest Service was not a direct participant in land grant speculation, it inherited a lot of the animosity that speculation produced. And so the Forest Service never got off to a very good start with the people of northern New Mexico. And goodness knows the recent Calf Canyon Hermit's Peak fire only rekindled a lot of the animosity that's been felt for generations.
Yeah, right. And you really quite prophetically write about fire, the issue of fire, its historically cultural use to manage the forest, and how that management changed under the Forest Service, which resulted in the current situation where we have really these overgrown forests that are too dry and too sick, and that are igniting more and more often, and the fires becoming exponentially larger and more severe. Your recent article, New Mexico's mega fires mark a turning point, picks up where you left off in the book. So would you like to talk a little bit more about the fire?
Yeah, and you've summarized it very well, the influence of fire suppression on the buildup of fuel within our forests. But that problem, that signal, that ecological signal, is going to be drowned out soon by climate change itself. Because as we get hotter and drier, that buildup of fuel, in a way, won't matter, because the forests are going to burn anyway, because the forests are going to be so hot and so dry. So this is very cold comfort for the Forest Service, but their century-long and more era of total fire suppression, it's a big factor now in how the forests ignite and burn, but it won't be in another 10, 15, 20 years. The scientific modeling indicates that by about 2050, that's 2050, coniferous forests in New Mexico, in the Southwest, are going to be a rare thing. There just aren't going to be very many of them, very much of the kind of mountainous forests that clothe our beautiful mountains today. It's sad to say, but that's the path we're on, because our society the first warnings were in the 1960s. There were strong warnings in the 80s. And as a society, we still haven't done anything very substantial to lessen our greenhouse gas pollution. So we're going to lose our forests. I like to, the way I think of it here, I'm on the west side of the Sangres. The east side burned this time. We prepared to evacuate over here, but we never actually had to. And what we went through was, in a way, a good dress rehearsal, because although we dodged this bullet on this side of the mountains, climate change has unlimited ammo. Our trial will be coming.
Yeah. So I have a couple more questions about the River of Traps. I do see we are getting close to 6 o'clock, so I would like to invite everybody.
Because I talk too much.
No, it's been great. It's been perfect. But I would like to invite everybody, while we still keep chatting a little bit, do put some questions in the chat or some comments. Grab your favorite book. It doesn't have to be the ones that we talked about. It can be another one. So while you're doing that, I will just transition once more to River of Traps, which admittedly is my favorite book. It chronicles a kind of soil story that I have since found was repeated all over New Mexico in various places where back to the landers knew nothing about farming in this dry land, and they were turning to their neighbors for guidance and advice. And those neighbors typically were mayordomos or presidentes, and they were connected to the newcomers through the acequias. So introduce us to Jacobo. your neighbor and the star of this book, which also includes the beautiful black and white pictures by Alex Hallis.
Yeah. Well, my partner and I moved to El Valle in 1975. We thought we were going to just stay here a couple of weeks while we found a place to live in Santa Fe. We wound up, well, I've basically stayed for the rest of my life. And our closest neighbor was this old gentleman, Jacobo Romero, who originally came by to register us as Democrats. He was the precinct chairman for what he called the Democratic Party, and he was eager to find out if we were going to be Democrats or Republicans, and if he could count on us to help get out the vote and things of that sort. Anyhow, he became like a grandfather to us, and we just wound up spending a lot of time with him, and through him and with him learned the skills of living in this place, irrigating, fence building, handling horses, handling cattle, managing woodlots and vegetation of all kinds. So this book is really a biography of old Jacobo, and he was a member of that generation of New Mexicans now gone, who grew up in a world that didn't have much cash. It was mostly a barter economy. The only language spoken was New Mexican Spanish. Gringos only lived far away, and people depended on what they produced from their farms to support them through the year. So it was a subsistence agricultural life. Jacobo himself, most of his adult life, he would leave El Valle for part of the year and go and herd sheep in Wyoming or Utah.
Yeah, so in a way, this is really the companion book to Enchantment and Exploitation, which is what I think you allude to in chapter 3, when, and you maybe can read us this passage here, just as we're wrapping up here. I think here you mentioned, I think you mentioned Enchantment and Exploitation.
Yeah, this book, there's a Jacobo appears in a chapter in Enchantment and Exploitation, and this second book kind of explodes that chapter into a book of its own. The notes I wrote of Jacobo's stories were never as detailed as I would later wish, for my attention was elsewhere, on the book I was trying to write. Yeah, that's Enchantment. It was conceived modestly, if ambiguously, as a natural history and trail guide to the wild, higher reaches of the mountains, lands generally known as the Pecos Wilderness. As I proceeded, the project grew out of control, I thought, and it filled me with anxieties about money and skill and failure. Next to those concerns, the stories of an old man who had long lived in the shadow of the mountains, but who scarcely knew their inner fastness, seemed peripheral, distracting. But the book kept moving in his direction. I started out writing only about the land, its geology and ecology, all safe subjects in my view, because they avoided the complexities of human affairs. But before long, I discovered that the trails of natural history led also to villages and towns. There were people in the mountain landscape whom I could not ignore. They had used the land and ultimately altered it. Even more interesting was the question of how the land had altered them, how natural history had shaped the history of cultures. I did not expand the scope of the book in order to include Jacobo's stories, but if I'd been smarter, I would have, and I'd have saved time. His stories eventually found their way into the manuscript because finally I realized that they cut to the heart of the tale I wished to tell. It was humbling for me as an aspiring scholar to plunge repeatedly into archive collections or the dusty back stacks of libraries, there to find that the kernel of understanding I sought was already with me, carried unnoticed like a burr on my clothing in a story learned from Jacobo.
I just love that passage.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, I think we have some questions and reflections in the chat. And the way we usually do this is we ask people to unmute themselves and talk to you directly. So
Great.
Go ahead, Jan Willem, I think you're up first.
Jan Willem, hello.
Hi, Bill.
I haven't seen you for a while. Nice to see you now.
I'm still here, and I'm in your old room on 1413 2nd Street, Suite 5.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
I still have some of your treasures on the wall.
And some of my dust balls in the corners, I'm sure.
Who knows? In any case, I was thinking about the soil health movement and what reflections you might have, what thoughts, ideas, feelings of how the path we're on, many of us are on, and rediscovering soil and how important it is and what's alive in the soil, and how that gives us maybe some hope. And what your thoughts are about hope in this rediscovery path that we're on individually and collectively for society and for the land.
Well, hope is a big subject, and it's really the subject of that book that Isabel introduced, The Trail to Kanjiroba. That's the book of my quest for an enduring kind of hope. And one of the things I learned along the way is that hope means so many different things to different people. And if your hope is based on just wanting things to be the way they used to be, you're not going to be very happy, because that's not going to happen. But if you ground your hope in a relationship to uncertainty, if you prepare for the future, knowing that the future will have many, many surprises, and some that are completely unexpected, that can be the root of a more sophisticated kind of hope, and a more enduring one. When it comes to thinking about soil and hope, I wonder on my own place how much longer I will have enough water to trick my hayfield into thinking that it's in an environment with 35 inches of rain a year. That's what irrigation does. We're not going to have the irrigation water we need. So I am hopeful that I can figure out another set of seeds to have out there, another set of plants that can be productive, that will be different, but that will thrive in the new environment to come. One of the things I say pretty often when I give public talks is that we in the Southwest are very lucky and well prepared for the future that we face. We're very lucky because we live in one of the most beautiful lands on the planet. And we're well prepared because if we live in the Southwest, we love the desert. And that's a good thing, because in the future, there's going to be a lot more desert to love. And we're going to have to adjust ourselves to seeing the gradual aridification of our already dry landscapes.
Thanks. Jan Willem, do you want to comment or?
I'm saying thank you, Bill. And maybe once I will knock on your door when I'm in your neck of the woods.
Sounds good.
Let's hear from others.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Elena Kayak, you have a question in the chat. Would you care to pose it?
So I get to do something new here because I just retired as a sustainability educator after 38 years. And I always felt like I was doing something positive to educate children about everything that you just mentioned. And I feel very stuck because we have this 1 acre in Corrales that we've permacultured and amended the soil and planted trees every single one of those 28 years. And it's thriving. It's almost lush. It's almost non-deserty, and it's a cheat. I feel it's a bit of a cheat because we've created this kind of oasis in the desert. And it's time to do something a little bit more. And my question is really, okay, this is permacultured. We built up soil. We knew what we were doing in terms of getting chickens to be our master composters. But now what are some strategies? And if you lean towards education, that's all the better, but it doesn't have to be. What are some really like action items that you would share with this group in order to do something a little bit more substantial and more far reaching?
Oh, golly, that's a question I'm incapable of answering well. I think people like you who are doing it at the nuts and bolts level, at the soil level, know much more than I ever will about what the big next steps are. I personally think that, well, I tried to practice range rehabilitation on a large scale. Jan Willem will remember. I managed a grass bank out on Roe Mesa. And one of the main purposes of it was to move cows to that land so that the land the cows came from could be rehabilitated through the use of light fire. Well, that was right in the teeth of the worst drought in the 2001, 2002, 2003 period. And what I learned is that landscape rehabilitation, when it doesn't rain, is really, really hard. But figuring out the effective ways to prepare semi-arid and truly arid land for rehabilitation when the rain eventually comes, that to me seems to be a top agenda item for our part of the country. You know, the mesic environments near our rivers, up in the mountains where I live, things like that, that working there is good, but the real future, the real challenge is going to be in the true semi-arid and arid lands, and figuring out what we can do now to prep the land so that when the rare rain does come, the land can make the most of it. That to me is a critical thing. And I know you people know so much more about that subject than I ever will.
Thanks, Elena, for this question. Did you want to comment?
Other than the fact that our 3 children are moving to northern climes, I feel like they are climate migrants because they see no future in New Mexico. And that saddens me that, you know, they're going to the Pacific Northwest to rehabilitate a forest there. So what you're saying, they've got some acreage in the Pacific Northwest that they're working on, but they have, you know, set their sights elsewhere other than New Mexico, which is very sad. You know, that they need to look elsewhere, that they don't see that the water is going to be enough here, and it's tough.
Well, maybe they'll come home to dry out eventually. I've known of people who leave our dry country and for wetter climes, but they wind up coming back because there's something here that pulls them. So
thank you.
Fingers crossed.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Priscilla, would you like to go ahead and ask a question?
Sure. Hello, Bill. So I teach in a BIE school, and I've noticed that a lot of our students are not connected anymore to their community, to their food, to their soil, and as well as to their planet. And a lot of the people here, well, it's on the Navajo reservation, and my father-in-law was a Navajo medicine man, and my mother-in-law, she was a Navajo medicine woman. And she really taught me a lot about the healing of the earth and how it works, as well as like collecting plants and what have you from the mountains. And we are seeing a big change in, collecting different plants and stuff. There's some of them are just, you can't find them anymore. They're very limited. And it's trying to bring our students back to, their, back to their culture, back to their, where they come from. And I was just wondering, the places that you have visited, are they really big about, teaching all of these important lessons to their children so that they can pass on, so they know how to take care of the earth better? Because we're talking about our future generation here. And unless something changes.
Can you hear me all right, Patricia?
Yes, I can.
There was an odd thing to the sound there. Okay, great. I think what you've described is a problem or a challenge in many, many countries and cultures all around the world, and that is the transmission of earth knowledge in this time of technical, we have so many shiny things in our lives, and not just in New Mexico, but pretty much everywhere. The young people are drawn to the cities, drawn to the urban life, et cetera. And the transmission of the rural land culture and knowledge is an enormous challenge. I've been inspired lately. I've been doing a little bit of work with the Blackfeet up on the Blackfeet res in northern Montana, up against the Canadian line. And there, that tribe, those folks are bringing back free-roaming, free-ranging bison as a way not just of ecological renewal, but of cultural renewal and revitalization around that totemic animal. They're really just started, but they're making great progress, and there's a sense of we can do this there that is really inspiring and important. And I just hope that we in New Mexico can find analogous and parallel kinds of vehicles to capture the imaginations of the kids. I mean, one inspiring teacher, and I'm guessing you are an inspiring teacher, one inspiring teacher can transform life after life after life. And that's some of the most important work that can possibly take place in a society. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate your feedback.
Thanks, Priscilla. The next question comes from Tomek. Go ahead.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for the lovely chat. One thing, when I was reading Enchantment and Exploitation, that was kind of a persistent question, is, when we talk about Hispano and Manito communities here in northern New Mexico, and the alienation that they experienced from their lands in kind of the late 1800s through the mid 1900s. We talk a lot about environmental degradation that happens during that time in terms of overgrazing and declining productivity, increased erosion, things like that, which struck me as a little bit surprising because these are incredibly resilient people who have had to adapt to a lot of changing conditions, who are deeply connected with the land and are certainly aware of changes that they can observe. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, at least for me, filling in that gap in terms of some of the adaptations that happened during that time period to those sort of shifting socio-ecological conditions.
Well, the biggest changing condition was probably the sort of expansion of the cash economy that captured people. Suddenly, in order to live well, the definition of living well changed a lot. You had to have more things, and to get them, you had to have cash, and that drove a lot of changes that sent the men out of the village to the railroads, to the sheep camps, to the lumber camps, etc., to earn cash. And the infiltration of the cash economy into the subsistence world transformed northern New Mexico, lock, stock, and barrel. And that infiltration is still happening in other corners of the world. When I was in Laos, I sure saw it firsthand. And it's never an easy transition. And it's not something that the people involved in it want to stop. I mean, it is really nice to have metal tools. It is really nice to have things you can cook with efficiently and effectively. It is really nice to have water piped into your house. I mean, these are, none of us want to give those things up. I think one of the things that we wrestle with, though, with our histories is that we usually want to reduce history to a good guys versus bad guys story. And history almost never submits to that. There's no culture I know of that didn't have a big impact on its environment. There are no, sort of ecological saints. Every society, every culture has to negotiate some kind of set of balances. Possibly our present culture has done one of the worst jobs in history of doing that. But the idea that the good guys are always good and the bad guys are always bad doesn't hold up very much as you look at the real complexity of human affairs. And so that should teach us all, I should hope, humility and compassion for the things that we both observe and the people we live with and interact with.
Thank you, Tom.
Great, thank you.
Comment or yeah, good. Thank you. We have one more comment in the chat or a question from Elaine. And please do keep adding because we have a couple more minutes to go. So don't be shy.
Well, I would appreciate your perspective on how those of us who've been the dominant culture in our state can learn from the wisdom of communities that have been marginalized without exhausting those folks because we're asking them to do 101 education with us.
Yeah, that's a real problem, isn't it? I think at last, in the last couple of decades, we've seen more chairs around the table, where things get decided. And we just need to keep on with that. Sometimes I just wish that some of us who are so sure of ourselves could just learn what the writer Sherwood Anderson called the trick of silence. The gringo world just needs to be quiet and listen better a lot of the time. I think there's progress, but there's never enough progress. And I think as much as I love public processes to develop as plans as a community to manage this tract of land or to do this set of policies or whatever, I realize that it's exhausting for people and there's a lot of burnout in there. I'm pretty burnout on that. And I don't know really what the answer is. We need to become more efficient. Mo Udall, when he chaired the House Natural Resources Committee in the US House of Representatives, sometimes would toward the end of a meeting, an exhausting meeting with one witness, one testimony after another, would say, well, everything's been said, but not everybody has said it. And, and I'm afraid so many meetings we go to, there's just so much repetition. People are asked to explain themselves at such a fundamental level. I don't know what the answer is, but we all need to be smarter, more tolerant, more accepting, and more willing to listen to people who are different from us. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, it is 2 years, 1 month.
Yeah, right.
Correct. So yes, thank you. Thank you, Bill. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So would you care to do some closing words for us?
Well,
Anything you would like to share?
I just want to say thank you for what you all do. You know, everything begins with soil. And it is the primary factory for, well, soil and leaves. I'm going to say a word for photosynthesis here. But, you know, one of the most heartbreaking things about the fires in our mountains is just the loss of soil. You all work so hard to produce new soil in, you know, small areas, and then we see whole mountainsides shedding the soil of generations of, if not centuries, in one fell swoop of a hard rain after a big fire. It's pretty heartbreaking. One of my hopes is that as we see the forests die back, that many of them will just die in situ and blow down and not burn, so that all that organic material will stay behind and not just be consumed. But the work of soil and educating people about soil is vitally important work. And my thanks to you. May you continue to do that with strength and energy and much happiness.
Well, thank you so much. I see more thank yous in the chat. This was a really fun, very special conversation. Thank you everyone who attended as well. Thanks for your conversation, for your comments, your questions. So the next soil story is going to be with another 2 authors. Anne Wickley and David Montgomery are going to be with us. So we hope to see you again in a month from now. And until then, take good care and we say goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye, Bill. Thank you so much. We really are appreciative.